Chapter 14. Kivaza stood in an open field. Even knowing that it was a mental construct, the feeling of her long gray-black hair against her back and the gentle wind against her golden-brown skin felt almost as real as it did in her waking life. "Well, I'm here," Kivaza growled. "You wanted to talk, here I am. Let's get this over with. I want my tails back. Are you going to show yourself, or do you expect me to argue with the wind?" "I'm still deciding what I want to look like." "Are you serious?" Kivaza asked in disdain. "What's your conflict?" "This is not my conflict," Kayla scoffed. "It's ours." "What's wrong?" "I'm not happy with our current arrangement." "Let me guess," Kivaza scoffed. "This is about your brother?" "You know Vance and I aren't really related," Kayla screeched. "Calm down," Kivaza said irritably. "You're overreacting. I know it must hurt you that they used your memories of your brother as a template. I'm not thrilled with it either, honestly. I was going to go get some advice. I don't know what we should do." "Why did I ever think you were the smart one?" Kayla chided. "You are half of who I am," Kivaza snickered. "I thought it would be better to get advice from someone who isn't actually me." "I'm sorry," Kayla cried softly as she spoke. "I was just so damned determined to make him be my first. I shouldn't have gotten in your way. It should have been Cyan." "That's not important right now," Kivaza insisted. "What do you think about Shinji?" The sound of her words passed her lips before she even realized she'd regained control of her body. She slowly stood up and looked around in confusion. Kivaza walked over to where Kayla had cast off their clothing earlier. There was just no point in using the towels unless they were drying one another. She dried herself off using her elemental control, then let her mind wander as she got dressed. If she used the ancient name Kivaza, she'd draw unwanted attention, so that wasn't an option. Initially, she had decided to keep using the name Kayla, but that name was known to her enemies, and using it would increase the likelihood of being noticed by them. Since her transformation, none of her old names suited her. The nickname she'd initially accepted was problematic due to her ancient past. She sighed as her thoughts returned to Shinji. In his current state, replacing that memory should be easy enough, but what should she replace it with? She finished getting dressed and started up the stairway toward the house. What PRI had done to him was unforgivable. Killing his entire family was bad enough, but they'd deprived him of the chance to grow up. After every mission, they would have reverted him to the state he was in when he first arrived. Kivaza had no choice but to issue the backup command, making sure he would forever be the person they tailor-made him to be, all to get to her patient number so they could attempt to bring her back under their control. It was far from ideal, but if anyone were ever to use his patient number to issue the restoration command, he'd revert all the way back to being that little boy those soldiers had captured so long ago. He wouldn't remember anything after the death of his sister. The choice was clear regardless of any moral ambiguity. Her implants had already been discovered and removed, so the discovery of her old patient number was no real threat to her, but as long as his implants were intact, they could use his patient number to control him. Unfortunately, it would take a well-trained specialist to remove the hardware, and he could have a mindworm in his head as a safeguard, just as they'd done to her. Kayla's consciousness was buried so deeply within their shared mind Kivaza couldn't even feel her presence. Her blacktail closed the gate behind her as she passed through the archway which connected the pool area to the courtyard behind the house. Kivaza considered for a moment. "No, I really don't like it. I may pull that little memory out of his head, along with the memory of those 3 little Kayla whispered in his ear. All of his current memories had been implanted by the PRI staff. He'd never been caught while trying to rob a member of the Shadow Brigade. He'd never actually been inducted into the group, yet for some reason the local members of the Shadow Brigade believed he had been a member in good standing for 6 years. He'd left the back door open. Apparently, her instructions hadn't been specific enough. Kivaza stood just outside and took a deep breath. She felt as if she were about to enter a magical portal to some other reality. "What should I do?" she whispered as she stared into the house. "Are you paying any attention in there? I'm starting to worry." Her twin brown tails slowly wrapped around her and held her tightly. "Thanks," she muttered. She glanced down at her black tail, which was lying listlessly behind her. "I know," she said irritably. "There's no point in wallowing." Her brown tails went limp and fell to the ground at her feet as she spoke. "Well, so much for taking a few days to settle in, relax, and let the universe tend to itself. I should have known that the proverbial powers that be aren't ready to let me take some time off. What would my old master think if he saw me like this?" She shivered involuntarily. She knew exactly what Sadakar's response would be. Many of his lessons had been brutal, but there was a strange compassion buried beneath his callousness. He and his people were trapped in an ever-repeating cycle of death and rebirth. He'd convinced her that it was her destiny to break this cycle. He longed for a release from his unending torment, regardless of the potential cost, and hoped she could be the key to unlock the chains of destiny which bound the remnants of the Valkrengen-O race. She remembered a day early in her training, lying bleeding to death at Sadakar's feet, pleading with him to either take away the pain or kill her. While he had the power to restore her body, he refused to do so. Instead, he watched her writhing in pain, with a distant look in his cold yellow eyes. "Child, the pain you feel now is trivial," Sadakar had told her. "True agony comes from within. Its invisible claws will tear at you without leaving a single mark on your flesh, but the wound will run deeper than any I could inflict upon you. One day you will receive such a wound and it will threaten to burn away everything that you are, until only ash remains. This is not a fire that can be subdued. It must be endured until you are able to pass beyond it, but you will forever be changed by it." The memory was so vivid it was as if she could count the gray-blue scales on his face. At the time, she hadn't understood his words. Now, looking into the house where Shinji was sitting silently, mindlessly, waiting for her, she finally understood. It wouldn't matter how many Ravenhawk clones she killed. Even killing the real Rukuhar wouldn't be enough to heal this wound which had been inflicted upon her. Shinji had simply been a tool, a weapon, used to pierce her to the very core. Her black tail moved in front of her and flexed its muscles to display its stinger. "Don't worry," Lady Darkseid sneered. "I'll make him suffer. Suffer for what he's done to Shinji, Thalu." Her brown tails slapped against the floor in front of her. "And Kayla." She took a deep breath and sighed heavily as she stepped into the house. She could just give him the command to back up all of his memories and experiences to the implants embedded within his skull, but as long as his patient number was intact, he'd be vulnerable and subject to further PRI influence. Kivaza hunted around for her pendant and earrings. She wasn't sure if she'd taken them off while she was sleeping or if he'd taken them from her after bringing her inside. Let's see, if his personality was modeled after young Kayla's idealized view of her brother Vance, she thought inwardly the earring should be. She opened a drawer in a lamp table next to where her feet had been positioned while she was asleep. Kivaza grinned smugly as she retrieved the earrings, but the necklace wasn't in there. Her black tail reached toward the lamp on the opposite side of the couch. Of course, Kivaza chuckled quietly as she retrieved it from where it was hanging over the top of the lamp. "I'll have to get together with Cyan to get my other armor back," Kivaza said with a broad smile. The two women had never finished what they started. Kivaza was eager to resume where they left off. She stroked the top of her left earring to bring up the contact display. "I forgot to get contact information for Gaorun," she scolded herself. I'll figure it out when I head to the ship, she grumbled. Having to meet with Gaurun 2 days in a row sounded exhausting. She stared blankly at the entries on her contact list. The entry for Nurse Nelfrey seemed fine, but the two that Cyan had entered were another matter entirely. Stripe Inspector was clearly what Cyan entered in for her own contact information, which would leave. Kivaza giggled as her brown tails thumped the ground on either side of her. Don't worry, Kayla, Kivaza snickered. I'll change it to his name as soon as I get a chance. Wait a minute, if she called his entry serviceable penis, I wonder what she called me on her list? Instead of joining her in the shower, the day they met, Shinji had taken a call. He forgot to bring her bra back. He also seemed a little different after that. Now she knew his PRI handler had contacted him once he'd returned to his room at the barracks. She glanced over at Shinji. He was still sitting silently on the couch. His defenses were completely down, but there was no way for her to know if they'd slipped a mind worm into his skull when they installed his implant. She couldn't risk a deep scan. If there was a worm crawling around in his brain, it would kill him. She couldn't directly confirm her suspicions. Nelfrey would know doctors, but she had to keep it off the books to ensure PRI wouldn't find out about it. It would be great if she could trust the A-room. In light of how quickly and easily she came to trust in Shinji, there was something strangely comforting in the apprehension she felt toward the nurse. Kivaza and Cyan spent an entire evening together learning to trust each other. She had a good first impression of the nurse. Inviting her and Cyan over to the house for dinner sometime would be a good start at building trust. If they couldn't get along with her Tejmare, Kivaza had no use for them. Before giving that too much thought, she had to deal with Shinji. The most logical course of action would be to have a cyberpath hack the chips in his head, scramble his patient number, and rely on their guidance to decide what to do next. She rested her hand on the door handle, stopped, lowered her head, then turned to look at him. It's a little strange that I've only known you for 2 days, but I'm about to go through a lot of trouble for you, Kivaza mumbled as she looked over at Shinji. I just hope you'll forgive me for what I'm about to put you through. Then again, I can't leave you like this, can I? I feel a bit responsible for you. The sex was fun too, even if it didn't last long and ended badly. We'll try again sometime. My Tejmare doesn't mind if I have sex with other people as long as I keep returning to her. Kivaza opened the door and stepped outside. There was still a slight chill in the morning air. She walked across the driveway, past the fountain, and over to the well-tended knee-height hedges that lined the cliffside overlook. Kivaza was going to have to tread carefully. Cyanide had warned her that lamentics don't experience emotions the same as other species. Even with the assistance of the chemicals provided by the leech, most extreme emotions were unattainable to their species. Love and jealousy were alien to them, and possessiveness was virtually unheard of. The sun hung low in the sky, bathing the valley below in its gentle light. The distant buildings cast long shadows, like fingers reaching across the city far below. The capital had fallen and been rebuilt hundreds of times over its long history. She'd always thought the city was as ugly as the corruption at its heart, but from this distance it looked so different. It was as if some strange, clumsy child had built it out of mismatched blocks. There were only 3 structures which stood out in contrast to the rest of the city. Port Liberty had been constructed entirely during the reign of the former government. It was also the tallest structure on the surface. The main branch of the Black Church stood like a dark obelisk within the heart of the city. From this vantage point, it was clear Acorn and the Alliance hadn't put any effort into rebuilding after the battle was done. She could still see several craters spotting the landscape from the orbital bombardment. She fixed her gaze on the Black Church spire. If they kicked out all the factions, why are you still standing? She pondered. What makes you so special? The third and final discordant structure was encircled by impact points, but had remained untouched by them. The sides of the building resembled the other buildings nearby, but lacked the inherent randomness in its design. The top of the structure was round, flat, and metallic. She strained her eyes as she peered over the ledge. "That's an old mobile fortress design," Lady Darkseed said in surprise. "Someone sure went through a lot of trouble to hide you." "Wait a minute," she said with a start, "that's just Asios. So that's how the Acorn forces survived the attack. They had a dam fortress, complete with its own independent reactor and shield generators." Her tails traced across the ground around her. Her black tail rose up in front of her with its stinger retracted. "I know," Kivaza sighed, "I have to do something about Shinji." She mentally traced the streets through the city until she located Alliance Arms. She concentrated and let her consciousness flow outward, down to the city below, until she found the mine she sought. "Bruja," Lady Darkseed thought, "I have a situation and would appreciate your assistance." "Why contact me and not Acorn or the Alliance forces?" Bruja's thoughts seemed harried. "I need someone that I can trust to be discreet." Lady Darkseed waited impatiently for a response. "While I appreciate your business and the sentiment, this really isn't a good time. I can't step away right now. I've already had to call out to see how many of my girls are willing to work on their day off. I really need someone I can trust." Lady Darkseed tried to hide her frustration. "Isn't there anyone?" "My staff values their time off, and I value my staff." "Pick someone reliable and find out just how much they value their time." "You know I can pay them," Lady Darkseed insisted. "I'll see what I can do," Bruja thought in response. "This may take a while. I'll need a driver and a chameleon coat." "You're not making this any easier," Bruja thought irritably. "Please, just give me some time to see what I can do about your request." Bruja was a powerful telepath in her own right, but didn't have Kivaza's range or contact information, so the choices were be patient or risk annoying the raven-haired woman. "Now I wait," Kivaza said with a deep sigh. In all of Corrales, there was only one world where the materials required to create chameleon coats could be harvested, which included the hide of a spectacularly nasty animal. Every jacket was hand-stitched, and they were insanely coveted. As much as Kivaza wanted to talk with Cyan, Bruja was the person that could secure such an exotic item on short notice. She gazed out toward the wall near East Gate, and wondered if Cyan was out in the cave replacing those old power cells. "I wonder where she actually lives," Kayla muttered as she looked toward the Blade's Edge region. There was a single scar where some force had shattered the ground during the Siege of Hyrule. "Which of these is not like the others?" she mused as she studied the scenery. The angle of impact was all wrong. She was struck with a sudden realization. "I know that storefront. That's where we found Labartha's body," she said in surprise. What really happened that day? If Labarth really could see the future and knew the attack was coming, why was he at Intrinsic Books that day? None of this makes sense. Why was he so exposed? Did he know he was going to die? I can't imagine that being part of some master plan. Did Labarth assign missions to the people that should have made sure he'd gotten to safety that day? The people who arrived to bear witness to his fate might as well have been handpicked. Was it luck, coincidence, or something else? She reached into the recesses of her mind for her memories of that day, but they seemed fragmented and incomplete. It had been one of Kayla's experiences, and the emotional impact had dimmed her senses. Kivaza decided to recreate the moment and witness it anew. With a wave of her hand, the water within the fountain rose up and dispersed into a fine mist. She warped the sunlight through the vapor and sculpted the water and light until the scene came into view. Intrinsic Books had been partially demolished in the blast. There was rubble strewn across the ground, and a jagged hole could be seen which had penetrated through to the underground portion of the city. Shivar was already there when they'd pulled up on the scene. He was leaning over Labartha's remains. As soon as she began to let the memory play out, she realized how deeply flawed their own recollection had been. It wasn't Thalkar or Varshana that had reacted first. It was Kayla herself. "No, it can't be!" Kayla wailed in horror as they rounded the last corner. "Did I really sound like that?" Kvaza said in dismay as she paused the replay of her memory. This was actually one of Kayla's memories from the time period while her soul was within Bruha's former body. She walked over and looked at the image of her former self within the visualization. I'd seen the bookstore, and I could see Shivar leaning over something on the ground, but did I somehow already know it was Labarth? "This is all wrong," Kvaza said softly. "There's a roughly 10-foot radius around Shivar that negates all knacks. Labarth is well within that range. Whether or not he was dead, I shouldn't have been able to sense who was there. For that matter, I shouldn't have sensed anything or anyone within 10 feet of Shivar." Kvaza allowed the memory to resume. Varshana flung her door open before the car had stopped completely and ran to Shivar's side. She wrapped her arms around him. Kvaza froze the scene and replayed it again. She'd watched this from within the car, so it was impossible to see the green-haired woman's face, but there was no indication she'd looked down at Labartha's body. Stranger and stranger, Kvaza mused as she let the memory continue. "By the powers," Thalkar whispered, "it can't be." Kayla slowly opened her own door and climbed out of the car. Shivar pushed Varshana away, knocking her to the ground. Kvaza wondered why he did that. The metal half of his face was toward Kayla's vantage point in the memory, so there was no way to tell what his facial expression was at the time. Kayla knew Varshana had some acting skill, and Thalkar to a lesser degree. "It's suicide," Varshana called after him. "Please, don't go. We need you. I need you." That sounded convincing enough, but by the powers. "It can't be." "Really, Thalkar?" "That's what you'd say in a situation like this, and how was I so clearly able to hear something you whispered?" Kvaza let the memory resume. Shivar kept walking. Did he say something to her? Lady Darkseid wondered. "Please, Daddy," Varshana wailed in anguish, "don't go." The image wavered momentarily. Those words had startled Kayla when she'd heard them. That phrase doesn't fit Varshana's personality, Kvaza mused. That little wobble in the memory. Shivar paused mid-stride, lowered his head, and stood there for a moment as if frozen by her words, then turned to look at his daughter. "I'm the only one who can. I love you, but this must be done. I'm sorry. Please don't. I can't lose you, too," Varshana said. "What must be done?" Kvaza grumbled. Tears were streaming down the woman's face as her father turned and walked away. Kayla struggled to breathe as she approached Varshana. "It all seems a little off before the distortion in the flow of memory," Kvaza said in mild annoyance, "but everything from that point onward is pure melodrama." Kvaza halted the memory. "I knew. I remember it now. I knew he was dead, and apparently Varshana did as well. How did we know while Shivar and Thalkar both seemed so shocked?" The memory continued. Kayla knelt down and stroked the woman's long green hair. "We'll find a way," she said softly. "No," Varshana said with a tone empty of emotion. "My father is right, but he can't do this alone. If I can't stop him, I'll help him. I'm sorry, Kayla, but this is where we part ways. Good luck. I hope you find what you're looking for." "Was this whole incident staged for our benefit?" Kvaza grumbled. "Why?" Kayla tried to speak, but couldn't find the words. Her gaze fell upon the broken remains of Labarth, and she could not look away. "Make sure someone tells his daughter," Vershana said as she stood up and slowly walked away. "Wait," Kivaza said in surprise. "What did she say?" She replayed that portion of the memory twice to make sure she'd heard it correctly. "Labarth has a daughter? Who is she?" Kivaza asked as if she expected the spectral figures from her memory to answer. Suddenly Thelkar was standing behind her, and Vershana was nowhere to be seen. "We tried to keep you out of the conflict as much as we could," Thelkar said softly. "Wait," Kivaza commanded as she froze the image. For a split second she thought he was talking to her directly, in the present. Kayla had no memory of him walking up behind her. At the time, she assumed that she'd been so focused on Labarth that she simply hadn't noticed. Her innate sense of spatial awareness and the abrupt disappearance of Vershana revealed the truth. There was a gap within the chain of events, like a single stroke of an editor's pen. The memory finished playing itself out as she wondered what had been lost. Thelkar sat next to Labarth's body, near his head. He took out his headset and made a few adjustments before putting it on. "Labarth is down," Thelkar said. "Shivar just took a walk. It looks like Goliath's left his calling card, but it feels wrong. I think Shivar's going after him, but this can't be Goliath's doing." "Who?" There was no response from her tales. Kayla obviously had no clue who was being referenced. Thelkar rested his hand over Labarth's eyes. The last thing he saw was Ravenhawk. "I have no way of knowing anything more than that." He was quiet for a few moments, listening to someone talking over the headset. He drew a small ornate dagger from his belt and started tracing through the thick fur on Labarth's neck until he heard a faint metallic sound. "This part never made much sense to me," Kayla's thoughts flowed up from within. Kivaza smiled and thought back, "Stay with me. We'll figure it out together." "It's still there," he said as he began cutting off chunks of fur. "Do I need the chain or just the medallion?" He winced slightly as he cut through Labarth's fur until reaching the front of his neck. He pulled twice firmly, but the object embedded in the fur didn't move. "His hair is really matted and it's not moving." Thelkar paused for a moment. "You want me to what?" "I can't do that." "What could possibly be so important?" Lady Darkseid wondered as Thelkar struggled to free the mysterious object from Labarth's matted fur. "I don't care if I have to burn his corpse, I'm not going to cut his damn head off just to get some charm." The person on the other end of the headset was clearly yelling at him, and she could no more make out the words now than she could then, but it was a woman's voice. His mysterious daughter, perhaps? Thelkar wedged his dagger in under the medallion and pried it out from the matted fur. He withdrew the blood-soaked charm and looked at the hand which held the bloody knife with disgust. Lady Darkseid halted the memory and stared at the medallion resting in Thelkar's hand, the strange charm that had been cut away from Labarth's throat. A glowing red stone at the heart of a golden chain. "That's Lady Darkseid began, and then dispelled her visualization. "I've got it," Thelkar's words faded away as the mist dispersed. "I'll be there soon." It matched Cyan's brief description of a soul catcher. She'd found her answer, but some knowledge is too dangerous to hold and too volatile to keep. She sealed away the memory in the deepest part of her mind, only to be rediscovered when the time was right. She looked around in confusion. It hadn't rained, yet the entire driveway was wet as if the fountain had been emptied upon the ground. "How strange," she muttered as the sound of a car approaching distracted her. Bruja must have found someone that was willing to work on their day off.